Welcome to Sinister Serials, where shadows whisper and every tale chills to the bone. Join us on Macabre Monday for gothic tales shrouded in mist and mystery. Beneath the cloak of night, where shadows whisper secrets of old, lies a tale of curses woven through generations untold. Within these hallowed halls, the McAllister lineage battles a darkness that clings to their very souls. Bound by blood and burdened with breaking the unbreakable, they confront their fate at the stroke of the witching hour. Join us if you dare for Macabre Monday, where each story unfolds a tapestry of terror and tantalizing tales.
Chapter 15. In the shadowed alcove, Elias Blackwood's candlelit workspace stood as a chaotic testament to his obsession. Open tomes displaying archaic symbols lay strewn across a makeshift workbench, their pages rustling in the drafts that whispered through the ancient chamber. Scrolls, their parchment yellowed with age, curled haphazardly amidst the clutter. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust, ink, and something acrid that Margaret couldn't quite place, a scent that seemed to cling to the back of her throat with each breath she took. Margaret stepped cautiously into the alcove, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The space felt claustrophobic, a stark contrast to the forgotten grandeur of the chamber beyond. A chill clung to the air, counterbalanced by the dry heat radiating from a guttering torch nearby. The flickering light cast distorted shadows across the walls, making the space feel alive with a malevolent presence. With each step closer to Elias's workspace, Margaret felt the weight of the curse more acutely, as if the malevolent energy clung to the very artifacts he pored over. It was a tangible thing, a heaviness that settled over her like a shroud, making each movement feel sluggish and leaden. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, a primal warning of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of the torchlight. She sought clarity amidst the revelations that had shaken her family to its core. The desperate need to understand the true cost of breaking the curse drove her forward, even as hope for a solution battled with the lingering distrust that shadowed their every interaction with the enigmatic historian. Had Elias deliberately lured them into this situation, or did his desperation mirror their own? The question gnawed at her, a constant whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be silenced. Elias barely glanced up from his work as Margaret approached, his attention fixed on the ancient tome that lay open before him. The pages were covered in a dense scrawl of unfamiliar symbols, the ink faded and barely legible in the dim light. He traced one long bony finger across the page, his lips moving silently as he deciphered the arcane text.
I knew you'd come seeking answers.
His voice a rasp tinged with both exhaustion and grim satisfaction.
But knowledge carries a price.
His words held an unspoken threat, echoing in the oppressive silence. Was his assistance genuine, or was he playing a twisted game, setting terms they may not be able to refuse? Margaret's breath caught in the close air, the taste of copper on her tongue, a prelude to the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. A surge of defiance rose within her, burning away the tendrils of doubt. She refused to be drawn into his cryptic games, not when her family's fate hung in the balance. Margaret met Elias's gaze, her eyes narrowed with calculated boldness and a touch of skepticism.
Price or solution? Let's speak plainly.
Her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart.
My family pays a debt each day this curse lingers. We've come too far to be deterred by riddles and vague promises.
Elias finally looked directly at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and weary determination. He gestured towards a tome that lay open on the workbench, its pages marked with a crude sketch of the McAllister family locket. The image seemed to pulse with a sickly light in the flickering shadows, the delicate filigree of the locket's design rendered in stark, unsettling lines.
Your ancestor Eldric sought forbidden power.
Elias said, each word weighted with the gravity of centuries.
He bound a vengeful spirit to an object, a debt passed down through the generations.
The revelation struck a core of truth within Margaret, intertwining the guilt of her ancestors' actions with the desperate need to break free from their consequences. Could destroying the locket be the answer? Or would it unleash something even greater upon her already suffering family? The uncertainty was a physical ache in her chest, a tightness that made each breath a struggle. Internally, Margaret raged against the injustice of ancestral sin, the fury burning hot and bright behind her eyes. What right did Eldrick have to burden his descendants with the weight of his own transgressions? The thought of her own children suffering for the mistakes of a long-dead ancestor was almost too much to bear. But she masked the fury with a grim resolve, the mantle of responsibility settling heavily upon her shoulders. Her family's survival was paramount. No matter the cost, she would bear the weight of Eldrick's sins if it meant sparing her loved ones from the curse's relentless grip.
Tell me what must be done,
Margaret demanded, her voice laced with the determination of a woman willing to face the devil himself to protect those she loved.
whatever it takes.
The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge all in one. Elias regarded her for a long moment, his expression inscrutable in the flickering light. Then, with a slow nod, he beckoned her closer to the workbench.
The path ahead will not be an easy one,
He warned, his voice low and grave.
The spirit bound within the locket is a powerful force, twisted by centuries of rage and despair. To break the curse, you must first understand its origins.
He traced a finger over the sketch of the locket, his touch almost reverent.
Eldrick McAllister was a man consumed by his own ambition. He sought power at any cost, even if it meant dabbling in the darkest of arts. The spirit he bound was once a woman named Ilara, a powerful sorceress in her own right.
Margaret leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the sketch as Elias continued his tale.
Ilara was betrayed by those she trusted most. Her power turned against her in a brutal act of violence. In her final moments, she cursed those who had wronged her, vowing to return and exact her vengeance.
And Eldrick saw an opportunity in her curse?
Margaret guessed, her voice flat with disgust. Elias nodded.
He bound her spirit to the locket, hoping to harness her power for his own gain. But Ilara's rage was too great to be contained. The curse twisted and grew, passing down through the generations like a cancer.
Margaret's hand drifted to the locket that hung around her neck, its weight suddenly unbearable.
So how do we break it?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
The key lies in understanding Ilara's pain.
Elias replied, his gaze distant as if looking into the past itself.
To break the curse, you must confront the spirit within the locket and offer her the one thing she desires most: release.
Margaret's brow furrowed.
Release? You mean…
To break the curse, Ilara's spirit must be freed from its prison.
Elias confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of his words.
But to do so requires a sacrifice, a life given willingly to balance the scales of fate.
The words hung in the air between them, a death sentence wrapped in the guise of salvation. Margaret's heart stuttered in her chest, a sickening realization dawning upon her. To save her family, one of them would have to die. She pushed the thought away, refusing to dwell on the implications. There had to be another way, a path that didn't require the ultimate sacrifice. She would find it, no matter the cost.
And if we refuse?
She asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides.
If we choose not to pay this price?
Elias shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth.
Then the curse will remain, growing stronger with each generation until it consumes your family entirely. You must understand, Margaret, there is no escaping this fate. Eldrick's sins must be atoned for, one way or another.
Elias's words hung heavy in the air, each syllable carrying the portent of a difficult bargain ahead. It was a dangerous game they played, a dance with the devil, where the stakes were nothing less than their very souls. As Elias spoke, the room seemed to shrink around them, confining them in a cocoon of fear and uncertainty. With each passing moment, the tension grew almost unbearable. Elias's voice echoed in the silence, his words like a dagger piercing the heart of Margaret's resolve. It was a moment of reckoning, a crossroads where fate hung in the balance. The choice they were about to make would shape their destinies forever, and there was no turning back. With unwavering determination, Margaret stood tall, ready to delve into the depths of darkness to protect her family from the curse's relentless grasp. She stood on the precipice of a choice that would define not only her own fate, but the fate of generations to come. In the guttering light of the torch, the shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching out with grasping fingers to pull them deeper into the heart of the mystery. The revelation of Eldric's betrayal hung heavy in the air, the echoes of the past mingling with the uncertainty of the present. Margaret knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but she had come too far to turn back now. The weight of her family's legacy rested upon her shoulders, a burden she would bear until the bitter end. With a final, resolute nod, she stepped forward into the unknown. Ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, the flickering torchlight faltered, overwhelmed by the encroaching darkness, casting one last ominous shadow before disappearing entirely, a portent of the perils that lay ahead. As Margaret disappeared into the waiting shadows, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, Lily found herself alone in Elias's workspace. The alcove had become a nexus for the curse's power, the flickering torchlight bathing the space in an eerie, orange glow that made the ancient tomes and scattered artifacts feel strangely menacing. Lily's gaze was drawn to Elias's weathered hand as it traced the faded name, Ilara, etched across the cover of an ancient journal. His fingers shook, a testament to the weight of history and the grief that lingered in this shadowed space. Lily watched him, her own breath catching in her throat as she remembered the conversation she had just witnessed between Elias and her mother. Time seemed to slip its moorings in the depths of the caverns, the passage of hours warped and distorted until Lily felt lost and unmoored. A subtle chill permeated the air, despite the torch nearby, raising goosebumps along her arms. The dry tang of old paper mingled with the lingering scent of something sour and unfamiliar, setting her teeth on edge. Lily's mind raced with the revelations she had overheard. The curse, the locket, and the spirit of Ilara were all entangled in a web of betrayal and vengeance that had haunted her family for generations. And now, the key to breaking the curse lay in a sacrifice. A life given willingly to appease Ilara's restless spirit. Fear and confusion warred within Lily's young heart. She couldn't fathom the idea of someone giving their life to break the curse, especially not one of her own family members. The thought of losing her mother, her father, or any of her siblings was too devastating to contemplate. Yet, beneath the fear, a flicker of curiosity burned. Lily found herself drawn to the tragic figure of Ilara, a woman wronged and twisted into a force of vengeance. She couldn't help but wonder what had driven Ilara to such depths of rage and despair. Hesitantly, Lily approached Elias, her footsteps echoing softly in the oppressive silence.
Elias,
She began, her voice trembling slightly.
who is Ilara? What happened to her?
Elias glanced up at her, surprise and sorrow mingling in his haunted eyes. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle with the decision to share the tale with one so young. But as he looked into Lily's earnest, determined face, he relented.
In the realm where magic whispered through the wind and spells danced in the air, Ilara stood as a figure of unparalleled power and grace. She possessed a rare gift, a natural affinity for the arcane arts that set her apart from the common folk. As the years passed, Ilara's reputation grew, and she became known throughout the land as a sorceress of immense wisdom and compassion. Her heart burned with a fierce desire to protect the innocent and heal the wounded. Ilara dedicated her life to aiding those in need, using her powers to mend broken bones, soothe troubled minds, and repel the forces of darkness. People from all walks of life sought her counsel, for she possessed not only a vast knowledge of spells and incantations, but also a deep understanding of the human soul. Yet, even in her moments of triumph, Ilara faced a profound sorrow that gnawed at her heart. She had placed her trust in those she held dear, including your ancestor, Eldric. Little did she know that their loyalty would be tested, and their betrayal would cut her deeply. The weight of this betrayal lingered like a shadow, reminding Ilara that even in a world filled with magic, the bonds of trust could be fragile and easily shattered.
Lily listened, wide-eyed, as Elias recounted the tale of Eldric's treachery. How he had sought to claim Ilara's power for himself, twisting her magic and binding her spirit to the locket. The story unfolded like a nightmare, each revelation more horrifying than the last.
And now,
Elias concluded heavily.
Ilara's spirit is trapped, consumed by a thirst for vengeance that can never be quenched. The curse that haunts your family is born of her rage and despair.
Lily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. The injustice of it all, the cruelty inflicted upon Alara and the suffering it had caused her own family, was almost too much to bear.
Is there no other way?
She whispered, her voice small and pleading.
Must someone really die to break the curse?
For Elias sighed, the weight of centuries seeming to settle upon his shoulders.
I wish there was another path, child. But the curse is woven too tightly, the magic too dark and ancient. Only a willing sacrifice can hope to appease Ilara's spirit and break the chains that bind her.
Lily fell silent, her mind reeling with the implications of Elias's words. She thought of her mother's fierce determination, her father's unwavering love, and the bond she shared with her siblings. The idea of losing any of them was like a knife to her heart. And yet, as she gazed upon the ancient tomes and artifacts scattered throughout the alcove, a flicker of hope kindled within her. If there was even the slightest chance of finding another way, of sparing her family from the curse without the need for sacrifice, she had to try.
I want to help,
she said, her voice trembling but resolute.
I know I'm just a child, but there must be something I can do. Some way to learn more about the curse, about Ilara. Please, Elias.
Elias regarded her for a long moment, his expression softening with a mix of admiration and concern.
Very well,
he said at last, reaching for one of the ancient tomes.
We will search together, Lily McAllister, and perhaps, with the innocence and courage of youth, you may see a path that has eluded me all these years.
As Lily bent over the tome beside him, the flickering torchlight casting strange shadows across the faded pages, she felt a sense of purpose settle over her. The path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she would not falter. For the sake of her family and the restless spirit of Ilara herself, Lily would do whatever she could to unravel the secrets of the curse. And perhaps, in the depths of these ancient texts and forgotten lore, she would find the key to their salvation. Darkness enveloped them again, consuming the once-lit alcove in its shadowy embrace. But in that darkness, a new light had begun to flicker. The light of hope, fragile and tenuous, but unquenchable. It was a light that would guide them through the trials to come, a beacon in the shadow of the curse that had haunted them for so long. Margaret watched from the shadowy periphery of Elias's alcove. The flickering torchlight cast an eerie glow, making the ancient tomes and artifacts seem to pulse with a life of their own. Margaret's gaze darted between Elias and her daughter, a mixture of anxiety and strategic focus sharpening her features. Time seemed to have lost its meaning in this hidden chamber, each minute weighted down by the implications of Elias's revelations. The air hung heavy with a faint, oily smell, as if the torches burned with an unfamiliar fuel. It was a place where the supernatural and the mundane blurred, heightening Margaret's unease with every passing moment. She desperately needed clarity within the whirlwind of revelations that had consumed them. Elias's knowledge, shrouded in his cryptic demeanor, held the key to their salvation, but Margaret found herself growing more and more distrustful of the haunted scholar. Could she bear to bargain with this man so steeped in secrets for her family's survival? As if sensing her mother's turmoil, Lily's voice cut through the tense silence.
I know I'm just a child, but there must be something I can do. Some way to learn more about the curse, about Ilara. Please, Elias.
The vulnerability in her daughter's plea struck Margaret like a physical blow. Lily's words were a stark reminder of the fragile hope she represented, a hope that Margaret feared might be crushed under the weight of the terrible truth. A chilling sorrow welled within her, replacing the cautious calculation she had worn like armor. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp and uncharacteristically somber.
Enough of the useless searching. We already know what must be done. If there is another path, any other path, you will lay it bare.
Elias slumped against the crumbling stonework, his earlier strength fading. The curse thrummed beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the danger that permeated this hidden chamber. He stared at Margaret, defiance and weariness battling in his gaze.
There is no other way,
he rasped, each word a death sentence.
Perhaps survival is worth the cost.
His words crushed the fragile hope that had begun to blossom, leaving a cold, empty void in its place. Margaret's family huddled around her, their expressions filled with trepidation and fear. The realization that one of them would have to sacrifice themselves to break the curse was a burden too heavy to bear. Margaret struggled with the impossible weight of the unknown, the very idea of a greater darkness chilling her to the core. Could destroying the locket be a greater evil than simply bearing the curse? The thought was almost too much to contemplate. Torn between her pragmatic nature and the desperate need to end this generational torment, Margaret fought to maintain her composure. She had always been the heart of the family, the one who kept them together through the darkest of times. But now, faced with an impossible choice, she felt that strength wavering.
How could it be?
Margaret demanded, her voice taut with barely contained fury. It was both a demand and a plea, a last, desperate attempt to find another way. Elias met her gaze, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to echo through the centuries.
The curse is woven too tightly, the magic too dark and ancient. Ilara's spirit is bound by a hatred that can only be quenched by blood, a life given willingly to balance the scales of fate.
His words hung in the air, a final devastating revelation. Margaret felt the weight of generations pressing down upon her, the burden of her family's legacy threatening to crush her beneath its weight. And yet, even in the depths of her despair, a flicker of determination still burned. She would not let this curse claim another generation, not without a fight. If a sacrifice had to be made, she would bear that burden herself, to spare her children from the terrible choice that lay ahead.
Then let it be me,
Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper.
If a life must be given, let it be mine.
The words fell like stones into the stillness of the chamber, each one a solemn vow. Margaret squared her shoulders, ready to face the consequences of her decision, no matter how terrible they might be. But as she turned to face her family, she saw the same determined fire burning in their eyes. They would not let her face this alone, not after all they had endured together.
No,
Lily said, her young voice ringing with a strength beyond her years.
we will find another way. We will not let this curse take anyone else.
And in that moment, Margaret felt a flicker of hope rekindle in her heart. Perhaps, with the love and courage of her family by her side, they could find a path through the darkness. Perhaps, even in the face of such terrible odds, there was still a chance for salvation. The shadows of the alcove seemed to deepen and lengthen, but in the hearts of the McAllisters, a new resolve had taken hold. They would face this curse together, no matter the cost, and somehow, someway, they would find a way to break its hold, once and for all. Elias's voice, hoarse and ragged, cut through the silence.
The only way to sever Ilara's bond is to offer a life to replace her own.
The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implication. Margaret felt them land upon her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and leaving her reeling. The logical part of her mind recognized the finality of his statement, the grim truth that they had all been trying so desperately to avoid. But the mother in her screamed in silent denial, refusing to accept that the price of their salvation could be so high. Beside her, Lily's heart jolted, a sickening lurch that sent a wave of icy fear washing through her veins. She felt the weight of her family's gaze upon her, their eyes filled with a dawning horror as the realization of what Elias was suggesting began to sink in. For a terrifying moment, Lily didn't fight it. The thought flitted through her mind, a dark and insidious whisper. Perhaps this was always her destiny. Perhaps this was the role she had been born to play. Elias's alcove suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls pressing in on them from all sides. The torchlight cast monstrous shadows that danced and flickered, their distorted shapes seeming to mock the McAllisters' desperation. The ancient tomes and scattered artifacts that had once held such promise now appeared sinister, their secrets tainted by the revelation of the terrible price they demanded. A cold sweat beaded on Margaret's skin, the chill of it a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the chamber. The taste of copper flooded her mouth, a metallic tang that coated her tongue and made her stomach churn. It was the taste of fear, of the dawning recognition of the horrors that lay ahead. Elias's eyes flicked towards Lily, a flicker of desperation, pity, and something akin to grim approval passing over his weathered features.
The locket draws from the youngest, the bloodline. You,
He began, his voice trailing off as the unspoken plea hung heavy in the air. With those words, the impossible became tangible. Lily was the key, the sacrificial lamb whose blood would wash away the sins of her ancestors. The thought was staggering, a concept so horrifying that it defied comprehension. Was dying to break the curse a noble act, or was it merely a twisted bargain with a monstrous evil, a final surrender to the darkness that had haunted them for so long? Margaret felt a surge of rage course through her, a white-hot fury that burned away the paralysis of shock and left only a primal need to protect her child. It was a rage directed at Elias, at the world, at the curse itself, a searing, all-consuming anger that demanded action.
No!
The word tore from Margaret's throat, raw and jagged with emotion. She lunged forward, her hands outstretched, ready to rip the locket from Lily's neck with her bare hands if necessary. She would not let this happen, would not let her daughter be taken from her. Not like this. Not ever. But even as Margaret moved, Lily stepped forward, her small frame emanating a strength that belied her years. Her voice trembled but rang out clear in the stillness of the chamber.
But what if it's what Alara needs? What if this is how to end it all?
The words lacked conviction, a fragile whisper of hope in the face of such overwhelming darkness. But they were spoken with a raw courage that shattered Margaret's heart, a bravery born of desperation and a child's unwavering faith in the power of sacrifice. Elias's expression shifted, shock momentarily overriding the sorrow that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. It made him look strangely vulnerable, a man stripped bare by the sheer enormity of what was being proposed.
You would willingly?
He stared at Lily in bewilderment, his gaze searching her face as if trying to understand how such innocence could contain such strength. In that moment, Lily embodied the desperation of an entire family, a quiet wisp of a girl shouldering the weight of generations. Margaret's horror remained, a sickening knot in the pit of her stomach that tightened with every passing second. But even through the haze of fear and denial, she saw the flicker of acceptance in Lily's eyes, a grim resolve that seemed to age her daughter's features by years. Could the sacrifice of one truly save them all? It was the worst question a mother could ever face, a choice that went against every instinct, every fiber of her being. And yet, in the depths of her soul, Margaret knew that if there was even the slightest chance that Lily's death could free them from this curse, she would have to let her go. The thought was like a knife to her heart, a searing agony that threatened to consume her entirely. But she forced herself to push through it, to cling to the faintest glimmer of hope that this could be their salvation. There was a suffocating silence, broken only by the ragged sound of Elias's breathing. The question hung heavy in the charged air. Would they allow Lily to offer herself as a sacrifice to break the McAllister's curse? Lily's thoughts raced, a dizzying whirlwind of fear and determination that left her feeling unmoored. She grappled with the weight of the choice before her, the enormity of what she was considering. Was she truly being selfless, willing to lay down her life for the sake of her family? Or was this merely a surrender to the hopelessness that had dogged their every step, a final capitulation to the curse's inevitable victory? She didn't know. In that moment, all Lily knew was that she could not bear to see her family suffer any longer. If her death could bring them peace, could free them from the shackles of Alara's vengeance, then it would be a price worth paying. The locket around her neck seemed to pulse with a renewed energy, its pulsating glow casting her face in a sickly, otherworldly light. In the shadows of the alcove, Lily's expression was a mask of grim courage and barely concealed fear, a child playing at bravery in the face of the unimaginable. The fate of her family and of Alara's vengeful spirit hung in the balance, a precarious scales that could tip in either direction with the slightest breath. Lily knew that her next words, her next actions, would be the ones that determined the course of their lives. She drew in a shaking breath, her lungs burning with the effort. The weight of her family's gaze was like a physical pressure, their love and their anguish, a tangible force that threatened to overwhelm her completely. But even in the depths of her fear, Lily found a small, quiet place of calm. It was a stillness born of the knowledge that this was her purpose, her destiny. She had been marked by the curse from the moment of her birth, a child born to bear the sins of her forefathers. And in that acceptance, Lily found a strength she had never known she possessed. It was a strength that allowed her to stand tall in the face of her own mortality, to look death in the eye and not flinch away.
I'll do it.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I'll be the sacrifice.
The words seemed to hang in the air, a pronouncement that carried the weight of finality. There was no going back now, no turning away from the path that fate had laid out before them. Margaret made a sound, a keening cry of anguish that tore at Lily's heart. She knew that her decision would break her mother, would shatter the fragile hope that had sustained her for so long. But she also knew that it was the only way.
Lily, no!
Margaret pleaded, her voice cracking under the strain of her grief.
We'll find another way. We have to.
But even as she spoke the words, Margaret knew that they were a lie. There was no other way, no miraculous solution waiting in the wings. The curse demanded blood, and blood it would have. Elias watched the exchange with a heaviness in his eyes, a sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his soul. He had known this moment would come, had seen it in the lines of fate that tangled around the McAllister family like a noose. But even he, with all his knowledge of the arcane and the occult, had not been prepared for the sheer devastation of it. To see a child offer up her life so willingly, to watch a mother's heart break in real time, it was a cruelty beyond measure.
Lily?
He said softly, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart.
You understand what this means, don't you? What you're offering?
Lily nodded, a single resolute gesture that belied the fear that coursed through her veins.
I understand,
She said, her gaze never wavering from his.
I'm ready.
And in that moment, Elias saw not a child, but a warrior. A girl who had stared into the abyss of her own destiny and had not blinked, had not turned away. It was a courage that humbled him, a bravery that he knew he would never possess.
Then let it be done,
He said, the words like ashes in his mouth.
Let the curse be broken and let the McAllisters be free.
Margaret let out a wail of anguish, a sound that seemed to echo through the very stones of the chamber. She lurched forward, gathering Lily into her arms and holding her fiercely, as if she could somehow shield her from the fate that awaited.
I love you,
She whispered, her tears falling hot and fast onto Lily's hair.
I love you so much.
Lily clung to her mother, breathing in the scent of her, committing every detail of this moment to memory. She knew that it would be the last time she would ever feel the warmth of Margaret's embrace, the last time she would ever hear the steady beat of her heart.
I love you too.
She murmured, her own tears blurring her vision.
I'll always be with you. Always.
And then, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, Lily pulled away. She turned to face Elias, her chin held high and her eyes blazing with determination.
What do I need to do?
She asked, her voice steady and clear. Elias hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between Lily and the locket that hung around her neck. In the guttering light of the torches, the metal seemed to glow with an otherworldly energy, a pulsing, sickly light that cast deep shadows across the planes of his face.
The ritual must be performed at midnight,
He said, his voice low and solemn.
under the light of the full moon. You must stand at the center of the stone circle, the locket clasped in your hands. And then...
He trailed off, unable to give voice to the horror of what would come next. But Lily understood. She knew that in that moment she would have to summon every ounce of courage, every shred of strength to face the agony that awaited her.
I'll be ready.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I won't let you down.
Margaret let out a sob, a broken, anguished sound that tore at the very fabric of the air. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, to tear the very foundations of the world asunder. But she knew that it would change nothing. The wheels of fate had been set in motion, and there was no turning back.
We'll be with you.
Teen, she said, her voice thick with tears.
Every step of the way. You won't be alone, Lily. Not for a single moment.
Lily nodded, a faint smile ghosting across her lips.
I know.
She said softly.
I know.
And then, with a final lingering look at her family, Lily turned and walked out of the alcove. Her footsteps echoed in the stillness of the chamber, a lonely, forlorn sound that seemed to carry the weight of all their hopes and fears. As she disappeared into the darkness, Margaret felt something inside her break. It was a shattering, a splintering of her very soul, a pain so profound that she thought it might consume her entirely. But even in the depths of her despair, she knew that she could not let Lily face this alone. She would be there, would hold her daughter's hand as she walked into the jaws of death itself. It was the only thing she could do, the only comfort she could offer in the face of such unimaginable sacrifice. Elias watched them go, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. He had seen the threads of fate weaving themselves around Lily, had known that this moment was inevitable. But that didn't make it any easier to bear. He turned back to the ancient tomes that lay scattered across the workbench, his fingers tracing the faded lines of ink that spilled across the pages. In their cryptic symbols and arcane diagrams, he saw the echoes of Alara's rage, the twisted remnants of a soul consumed by vengeance. And he knew that no matter the outcome of this night, the McAllisters would never be the same. The curse had taken its toll, had exacted a price that could never be repaid. But perhaps, in the end, that was the true nature of sacrifice. It was a choice made in the face of impossible odds, a decision to lay down one's life for the sake of something greater. And in that choice, there was a power that transcended the bounds of mortal understanding. As the torchlight flickered and died, plunging the alcove into darkness, Elias closed his eyes and offered up a silent prayer. A prayer for Lily, for the McAllisters, for the countless generations that had suffered under the weight of Alara's curse. And in the stillness of that moment, he felt a flicker of hope. A hope that perhaps, even in the darkest of nights, there could still be light. That even in the face of unimaginable evil, there could still be redemption. The alcove's shadows grew deeper and elongated until they enveloped the entire room in an inky embrace. Within the enveloping darkness, the rhythmic sound of Lily's footsteps resonated, resembling a steady heartbeat. This unwavering rhythm carried within it the hopeful promise of a brighter dawn.
Welcome to Sinister Serials, where shadows whisper and every tale chills to the bone. Join us on Macabre Monday for gothic tales shrouded in mist and mystery. Twisted Tuesday will unravel your mind with psychological thrillers that blur the line between reality and madness. On Weird Wednesday, cosmic horrors from beyond the stars will haunt your dreams. Thriller Thursday brings tales of survival, where every shadow could be your last. Fantasy Friday weaves stories of ancient magic and mythical beasts. Sci-Fi Saturday launches you into dark futures and alien terrors. And on Supernatural Sunday, ghostly whispers and paranormal mysteries will leave you questioning what's truly beyond. Step into the darkness with us. The stories are just beginning.